Hey there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. It's another Red Pill Religion podcast. Red Pill Religion, where amongst the things we say are that LGBTQ people, or whatever they're going by these days, are humans who deserve respect for their rights. But the same holds for religious people. And we're going to have a little conversation, an informal conversation on that. But before we begin, please remember, if you like the kind of work we do here, please support our work on redpillreligion.com. In these days of social media censorship, that seems to be the safest place to find us. We get chased off of other channels and shadow banned routinely. We're currently looking at possibly getting up on a podcast network, but in the meantime, find us there, and we definitely appreciate your pay. And you'll find, PayPal, Bitcoin, Subscribestar. We're coming up on MeWe app. We really could use financial assistance to improve. Frankly, to improve the equipment and get the word out. And we have a whole team of volunteers who works every day to put the blog together and the various websites together. And we're doing content that's hard to do. We take a lot of grief and a lot of flack for what we do. So if you want to give us your support, please check us out on redpillreligion.com, hit one of those tip jars, or buy some of our cool merchandise, mugs and t-shirts and good stuff we got on there. Please also find us on other social media. At the moment, the one we're not being paid, there's no advertisement, but we're big fans of Gamba and Dissenter because these appear to be viable platforms that are genuinely offering free speech and commentary on the internet. They really appear to be real, and we support them. Find us on Red Pill Religion on that, on MeWe, and some of your other social media, including the team that's on Twitter. Max, don't get on Twitter. But all right, enough of all that. Good to see you. Now tonight, our primary guest is the Holy Spackle, who has her own YouTube channel, the Holy Spackle. Please find that link and go subscribe to it. How you doing tonight, Spackle?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well.
And I see that you are a Doctor Who nerd.
I am. I'm a Doctor Who and Star Wars mashup, apparently. So
I actually really enjoy that. Believe it or not on this channel, but on the Max Colby Group channel, sort of our backup informal channel, we do nerd streams all the time. So if you come to the Max Colby Group channel, we sit around talking about things like the last Avengers movie and things like Doctor Who. Actually, I have been a Doctor Who fan since the very early 1980s. I go that far back. I love Doctor Who.
Well, see, I'm not a real one. I'm not a real Doctor Who fan because I started with David Tennant and fell in love with David Tennant, and then I kind of moved from there.
Poser, you're fake.
No, I'm totally fake. But I am a real Joss Whedon fan. Big time.
Oh no! I go so back and forth on Joss Whedon. I'm teasing you, of course. Doctor Who fan is a Doctor Who fan for the most part, and I believe one of your friends has joined us. Who's this? Pseudo?
Pseudo, this is where you mic up.
Oh, hey, yes.
Good to have you join us too. You're one of Spackle's friends. Do you have your own YouTube channel, or are you just here to hang with Spackle?
I have my own YouTube channel. Yes.
I should have introduced you. I didn't get it. That's okay. What's the name of your channel, sir?
I watched YouTube from it, so I have subs, but I don't have videos.
Oh, you don't have videos. All right. You watch videos and you come to streams like this.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, good to see you anyway. And so this had started with Spackle because she had commented to me privately that she thought I was harder on gay and trans issues than she was. And that has always been, and this is for the general audience, by the way, for everybody who listens, that's kind of got into this conversation because I am actually really tired as a Christian for being beat up on gay issues. I really am. And of even to a certain extent seeing Christians being beat up on it. Because while the most loudmouth Christians who get the most attention are, of course, the most virulently loud about the gay issues, they're drowning out much more moderate and reasonable voices everywhere. And this also distracts from the fact that some very non-religious people and even anti-religious people in the world are extremely anti-gay. And so I honestly believe that people should step back and stop making it centrally about religion. I mean, I suppose to some it's going to be like, look, this is about God's word and I got nothing else to say. Fine, they're allowed to talk it that way, but at some level you have to be able to get along with people. I just wanted to establish my own creds here. I have a gay sister-in-law who's both Catholic and gay married. Now, somebody like Ted Schubat out there is probably going to flip his gut. But you know, I'm not saying I endorse it. I'm not saying anything except that there are people within Christianity who even fall on both sides of this. I have a close relative of mine who I won't say more about because it's their own, you know, they're private people. But I have a very close relative of mine who's trans or identifies as trans at this time. I've not thrown these people out of my life or my house. If you, and I'll even mention this, all anybody needs to do, this is why I get so angry with the atheists who do the gay baiting, because I'm convinced professional atheists gay bait because they want to pretend that it's only Christians who are anti-gay, and that's just not true. And all you have to do is go into Google and type a phrase like I did here, like gay-friendly churches or LGBT-friendly Christian, and you get tons of results. Now, there's a lot of Christians who say that, you know, that's a bad type of Christian, but at the same time, for decades now, the gay rights movement has gone to churches and sought the approval of Christians. Even in Catholic circles, I can point to people like, you know, Father James Martin and quite a few bishops who are pro-gay, who from within Catholic circles and with other Christian circles get attacked for it. There are gay priests, I can send you stories on them, you know, some of which are like, we want the church to be more liberal on gay issues. And there are gay priests, literally gay priests within the Catholic Church who are like, I support the church's teaching. I'm gay, but I'm celibate because I support the church's teaching. I just get really tired of people thinking this is a Christian versus not Christian issue, because it's a complicated issue. Do you know what I mean, guys?
Well, an interesting highlight, and I'm just gonna bring it up, is there was some drama on non-sec recently, which I talked about a little bit, and during that, there was a lot of finger wagging and shaming over an atheist that was, he said he didn't condone homosexuals, and then he kind of backpedaled from that and said he doesn't, you know, back up the, you know, gay pride kind of culture, and then he kind of backpedals from that, and you kind of watch this, you know, thread go down, and
This was on the Non Sequitur show.
yeah, and then they take turns with an empty seat, you know, yelling at him, and it was really interesting to watch because I'm watching an anti-theist woman, you know, ranting and raving about this. Well, not ranting and raving, emotional about this, and I was thinking to myself, like, I think that's interesting that it goes against anti-theist narrative that oh my gosh, it's only religion that causes this. Only religion. Couldn't be culture. It couldn't be maybe some factors of advancing you know, your people or whatever the factors are, right? It has to only solely be one of the Abrahamic religions that are causing this, and I think that's really interesting, and so I think that's maybe why my theory is why they were so shocked. Like, surely an anti-theist can't have that view, you know.
This is something that makes me crazy. Now, I pledge not to talk about the people on that particular show anymore because I've had enough of their antics and the way they do things. And I'm going to try not to name anybody from there. But on that particular show, they do play this game. And I'm actually been surprised that people I still respect, but don't have given me a hard time, like Dr. Cy Gart and others, cannot see that these people are playing a game. These professional atheists, these professional anti-theists, and they are professional. They get paid for their advocacy against religion. They're doing it on purpose, and they know it's not honest because they will try and sit there and tell you, you know, atheism says nothing. I've heard them do it. They even did this to Cy Gart. The guy runs, is it 6 Day Science here? No, the Book of Works. He runs the Book of Works blog, and he's been on our show for a while. He's mad at me now because I was really mean to one of the Non Sequitur show women. I was inappropriate, but the woman in question was terrible. Sorry to keep rambling, but I got to set all this up. They play this atheist game where they will say, atheism says nothing at all about your personality, except religion says all kinds of bad things about your personality. it's this bait and switch way of doing it. So, and then, yeah, just what you just described there is the kind of bigoted dishonesty and bullying that happens in professional atheist circles. Because if you bother to go out there, I can name just one prominent atheist, Ayn Rand, not a communist, by the way, was found homosexuality utterly disgusting and depraved, and thought no true man would ever or woman would ever indulge such a thing. And they were among the moochers and the looters and the disgusting people who destroyed civilization. That's how Ayn Rand, the libertarian atheist, talked. Che Guevara used to talk about homosexuality as capitalist decadence and used to personally execute homosexuals with pleasure. You'll find sources online that try to deny this, but it's God's truth. If you go to China today, which is an officially atheist country, it is one of the most brutally anti-gay places you could ever go. They don't even pretend to be nice about gay rights. They will tolerate homosexuality in some places, usually in centers of commerce. And so, but even then, it's very strongly curtailed, and they just won't hesitate to beat you to death or kill you for being gay in China, atheist China. I've even heard the myth that Taiwan. I can tell you, the country of Taiwan recently. Taiwan is not at all an Abrahamic country. No Jews at all, no Muslim or Christian presence to speak of. They had a national referendum to try to allow gay marriage that people like the Soros Institute put up, and very non-Abrahamic Taiwan, overwhelmingly by 65%, said no to gay marriage. Straight up, no. That was how the vast majority of Taiwanese felt. You go to Japan, and we hear this idea that homosexuality is popular and widely okay in Japan. No, it's not. I've talked to enough Japanese. If you're in certain parts of Japan, it's highly tolerated, even flaunted a little, but most of Japan still considers it shameful behavior and not something you would really want to be displaying in front of others. It's a myth to put this all on religion. And I get tired of anybody playing it that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's more complicated than that. I think people would like to think that it's just simply a dogma, but I find that there are Christians that use dogma different ways, or not even dogma, just different statutes different ways. So like you'll have a Methodist on one hand, say love the other and use the, Good Samaritan, or the eunuch that Philip talks to as an example of loving the other person, and how we should treat homosexuals. And you have the other extreme of, Stephen Anderson saying he doesn't want to kill sodomites, but he wants the government to kill sodomites. And I understand that there's a spectrum within that religion, within Christianity of these different beliefs. But what's interesting is it is outside of Abrahamic beliefs. It's not just in Abrahamic beliefs, and it is outside of religion. It's not just in religion. And so there's different things that can be addressed besides dogma,
and how dogmatic is it to say you're a weak atheist or not a real atheist or not a strong atheist if you want to back away from something you don't feel comfortable with? There used to be more articles on this that you could find on the internet. A lot of them have disappeared, but there has long been evidence that people are born with a natural aversion to seeing homosexual acts, with the same kind of aversion that they have to bad food or a bad smell, that it's a natural aversion that a lot of people have. And I have a friend who grew up in a Hindu village in India, and not a Christian to be found. And he told me that in their village, when he was growing up, if they caught two guys buggering each other, the whole town would run them up on the nearest tree and lynch them. So, and I don't condone any of this. I just get tired of being told, well, none of it would happen without dastardly religion, when it comes from people, who will not admit that non-religious people do all these things. or that other religions besides the Abrahamic religions do all these things. They will not admit it. And so to me, it's just like, why aren't we allowed to discuss this like adults? People are uncomfortable with it, and people of all religions and no religion are uncomfortable with it. Can't we talk about it? You know, my lesbian sister-in-law does not go to gay pride parades. and well, at least not those kinds of gay pride parades where they're always flying
Well,
there.
yeah,
No.
that's an interesting thing too. Is like when I talk to evangelicals, particularly less Catholics, more evangelicals, they're so hypersexualized about LGBT issues. They think that somebody goes transsexual just because they want to have sex with a man, so therefore they want to look like a woman and be attractive. That's not always the case. Sometimes they're still with a woman. I've met a lot of transsexual women that are still married to their wives. So they're still quote unquote in a straight relationship, but
It,
they think they're a woman. I've known people who you know are gay, committed in a relationship, monogamous, and you know they have no desire to do what I like to call is the gay version of Mardi Gras. You know, it's wild and sexual, and they think it's over sexual, and they think it, you know, they think that maybe, you know, like, you know, gay pride as far as relationships go, yes. As far as wearing assless chaps, no. You know, and that exists in that spectrum. Like people always think of this extreme sexual person, and most gay people I know are just normal people.
I have to say that I've had a change and become somewhat more conservative and more militant on these issues. I haven't written off any of my gay friends, but I've had gay friends write me off, and that was a real eye opener for me. Because I mean, I'm old enough. I'm enough to remember. I mean, I had gay friends going back to the '80s. Okay, when I was hanging out with the theater kids, in high school, because that's how far back I go, right? And I knew what gay kids were. They were usually kids from lousy homes, who got bullied a lot, and they weren't always being bullied for being gay. And it wasn't usually the devout religious people bullying them, by the way, although sometimes it could be. It was more likely to be somebody non-religious who was beating them up and maybe having sex with them. I mean, the the whole this has become it has become now. Then I had friends turn on me, like people at the Honey Badger Brigade, some of my former men's rights friends and stuff like that. Simply learning that I was religious, especially Catholic, was viewed as making it acceptable for people to religiously bully me. And I had hordes of self-identified LGBT people come after me and attack me, even physically attack people I know for the crime of being Christian. This has happened, and I can't even get any of my gay friends or gay friendly friends or atheist friends or non-religious friends to speak up and say that's not okay. None of them will even say that's not okay, and I'm sorry it happened to you, and we shouldn't tolerate people acting that way. It's very disturbing, you know. I mean, like I used to be the managing editor of Voice for Men, and I've been quoted many times as one of the most pro-gay rights articles ever written on A Voice for Men. I wrote it and published it, only to be turned around and called a vicious homophobe and the cause of the oppression of gays by people who don't even know me, or in some cases, people who do. And that has really made me pretty militant. Somebody self-identifies as LGBTQ. I'm like, really? So you want to beat me up and blame me for all your problems? Because that's kind of how I've come to feel. And I think that's happened to a lot of religious people. Like, I'm like less liberal on gay issues thanks to the Honey Badger Brigade and the people over at Non Sequitur Show and a whole lot of the atheist goons who come out in force to abuse you just because they find out that you're Christian. And who come in and try and say, you're the cause of all the anti-gay sentiment in the world. I'm sorry, no, we're not. It's it's ridiculous. And yes, some will say the Muslims are worse, but I'm here to tell you, you talk to authentic Buddhists, they think that it's bad karma to be behaving in that way. And
that depends on whatever culture is attached to the Buddhism, right? So when you say authentic Buddhists, I mean, some Buddhists are actually believe in a deity, and some are an atheist.
Well,
And
what I would say for an authentic Buddhist is that you are not in one of the popular, trendy Western traditions like Theravada Buddhism. If you look at the ancient teachings of virtually all the Buddhist masters, they actually tended to encourage celibacy and refraining from all sexual desires as tying you more to, earthly passions and things, when the goal of the Buddhist is to give up all earthly passions. So that if you're going to be a Buddhist, you should either be having a very minimalist sort of having kids for bonding with your mate and reproduction attitude about that sex, and that's it. But otherwise, to give up on, have no sex, have no drugs, give up all of that. That's actually the Buddhist path. And most Buddhists I've talked to are real serious about it. Like, if you're choosing a life centered around your sexuality, you're already not walking the path of the Buddha. Because, so yes, maybe there are some in some Buddhist traditions who feel different, but I just mean, I don't know. I don't mean to talk over you, but
no, they're just not looking to self-indulge. So it's not necessarily about homosexuality as sexuality in general, right? So sort of like how Augustine talks about carnality, and so I think it's kind of the similar idea.
Yeah, Augustine talks about how all men are slaves. A man is a slave to as many passions as he has, I think is the way you put it. All the passions that he has, he's a potential slave to any of them. Sex, drugs, music, gambling.
We all know that Augustine was a man before he became a Christian, so he makes it very clear.
Is it really clear? You think he? I don't think he had. Did he make it clear that he had sexual relations with men? Because that wasn't.
No. That's not what I said. I said that he was a man slut, meaning like he slept around.
Oh yeah, he was a total man whore. Oh yeah, he slept around and did a lot of drugs, by the way, and stealing and booze. He didn't spend a whole lot of time in the Colosseum watching all the blood and gore, but he had lots of friends who did. He was into all the weird Roman orgies, and he even had some bastard kids, if I remember right. By which I mean kids that he wasn't married to the woman, Yeah, and he was one of the most influential Christian thinkers of all times. They really spread a lot of hate about him too. I don't understand why, because anybody who actually reads Augustine, he was actually a very warm, understanding man. He really was.
I have a love-hate relationship with Augustine. It's been a while since I've read the Confessions, so I'd have to reread it. But I remember being kind of frustrated. I think he thinks he grovels a lot. And I think that he is actually the inventor of the way that we view largely original sin. And I think maybe Orthodox Christianity has a better view than what Augustine presents, but maybe.
Okay, so you're a resistor on the original sin doctrine. That's one of the older arguments in Christianity. Obviously, Catholics believe in it, but even there, I would say that the way you interpret original sin, there's more than one way of interpreting it,
Eastern Orthodoxy, the way that they interpret it, makes a lot more sense to me. It just does, and so I see that as kind of a division between Christian thinking. But I'm glad that you didn't scream "stone the heretic" as soon as I said that, because that's your usual reaction that I get.
Well, Western Christians are real big on original sin. So even if they're not Catholic, a whole lot of Calvinists, Baptists, actually, I think the more hardcore Protestants have a more harsh view of original sin than Catholics do.
Oh yeah, penal substitution, like to the extreme, redemptive theology, all that has to go out the window. But I think I'm getting off the subject. I think
this is a good subject. It's boring. It really is. But since you've mentioned it, I should explain to the audience the brief difference and I think most Orthodox will agree with me on this and won't get mad. Most Orthodox would agree that there was an original sin. and that we are all affected by, the cumulative effects from that original sin and subsequent sins that came from it. They think that. They object to phrasing it as the doctrine of original sin, that we all inherit a spiritual stain from it, which has been the traditional way we say it in the West, that we're all marred by the stain of original sin. And they object to that phrasing of it. And I can see the objection. And, there's, because the bottom line is the Christian tale still is, either way, people screwed up, and we all inherit I mean, isn't it obvious to everybody that we inherit the effects of our parents and our grandparents' mistakes and flaws? Isn't that just obvious? Like intergenerational baggage that we all hold, stuff our parents did or failed to do, stuff their parents did or failed to do. Even when I hear it in the Bible, like, the sins of the fathers are visited upon the sons to the seventh generations. People read that as a curse, but it's more like, isn't it just observable reality? We're all inheriting not just our own dysfunction and damage, but the dysfunction and damage of the people who we grew up with.
I think that's the thing, is if you're in a community or in a family, even if you're in one of the more healthier communities and healthier families, you still have the capacity to hurt and injure people, and your weaknesses still can get pushed on to your other family members and affect them. And I've always viewed that as a very practical thing, and not a "woo, it's a curse," but this is how things are. And I think some people take it real far, and they think that, just because your father, I don't know, has a gambling addiction, therefore your family's cursed for, generations to come. It's not necessarily like that, but that gambling addiction can cause your family to lose their house, and then cause your growing up to be tough.
That's right. If your parents slept around, that there was probably instability in the family. If you were a child of divorce, I mean, I'm sorry, but your parents done screwed up somewhere. If you're a product of divorce, and you inherit that damage, whether there was physical violence, mental violence, neglect, or just stupidity or rigidity and unfairness, or even if you grew up in like the world's most perfect, we would call it a Brady Bunch family. I don't know if anybody can get that reference anymore, but a perfect family. Man,
the first family on TV that slept together in the same bed.
Yeah, the Brady Bunch. Yeah, first family on TV. I never liked the show, even as a kid, because the family of the Brady Bunch was too perfect. It was I mean, the dad was always right, the mom was always right, the kids were, even when the kids were wrong, they all just apologized, and everybody loved each other, and they all learned a valuable lesson, and it's a perfect family in every ridiculous way, to a point of ludicrosity.
I mean, do you like Game of Thrones better? I mean, that's probably more realistic.
Game of Thrones is more like how my family is. And the people I grew up, that's not entire. That's now I'm being sarcastic the other way, but I did have a pretty messed up. I got a pretty messed up family. I really do.
But I mean, honestly, most of us somewhere in our lineage have incest. Somewhere in our lineage, incest has happened. Most of us have these generational dirty secrets here and there in our families, and
oh my God, I
knows?
found out probably, I don't know, probably I have a great grandmother who was a secret lesbian. The stuff.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah, and actually, I can tell you, despite what you hear in very non-Christian Japan, just to zing around, really, no. In those Shinto and Buddhist homes, in those secular homes, no, they look down on gay guys. That's something maybe you do in private or in certain real rarefied circumstances, but it's not approved of. And I don't know how I got off on that. No, well, I think my point of that is, whatever it is, somebody in your family had a drinking problem, somebody lied, somebody cheated, somebody stole, somebody had a bad attitude, somebody had a drinking problem or a drug problem. Somebody went to jail. Everybody's got that, and we all get damaged from it. I mean, that to me is the ultimate Christian message, is to understand that we're all subject to this damage. Sin means either to miss the mark or transgress. That's what it means. A sin is when you hurt yourself or hurt God or hurt somebody else. The bottom line is when you hurt yourself, you hurt God or you hurt someone else. Usually all three at once is what happens. And it's just visible. We all inherit that damage. And it forms our personality and our life choices and often makes our life suck.
Yeah, I think the inherent difference that I see with orthodoxy is they're saying that sin is like an illness that befalls you, and it affects everything around you and the world that we live in. But what
Oh,
I'm finding a lot of evangelicals are interpreting original sin as, which is a different way of looking at it, is that we are inherently evil, or even as John Calvin says, doomed from the womb. You know, if God deems you so,
yeah, Bob
and
John
and
covered in maybe some snow God put on us, but completely depraved in all ways, right?
right, and then Imago Dei is just kind of thrown out the window. It's like something maybe that will become someday, but it's far off and definitely not on Earth.
Yeah, yeah. And I think some of that harshness from Augustine, because he tended to talk like that too, although I don't think he was as extreme as the modern Calvinists are. I really don't. But I mean, you see it in Augustine's case. Part of it was probably due to the fact that he did have a late life conversion. He grew up, I mean, his parents, his father left the family. So he grew up more or less fatherless. He more or less abandoned his mother and his younger siblings. He wound up leaving at least one kid behind with some woman he didn't stay with. He drank and whored his way and tried dozens, every other philosophy he could find before he finally later in life gave in and, surrendered to Christ. And I find that a guy who's been like a lot through a lot like that and like seen all there is to see, because he had friends who were into the Colosseum and were totally addicted to watching people being tortured to death, because that's what the Colosseums were. Literally, you're watching people being tortured and raped for your entertainment.
That was its modern day Game of Thrones.
It was modern day Game of Thrones, except it was real and people were addicted to it.
Old day Game of Thrones, sorry, reversed.
He didn't get too into it, but he writes about a friend of his who did, who was just at some point was just deplored with himself and disgusted, but just couldn't quit going to watch the people getting raped and mutilated and murdered in the Colosseum for entertainment. Augustine had seen literally every bad thing you can see out of people: rape, murder, incense, drugs, sex, theft, murder, torture, child abuse, you name it, he had seen it all. And I think this gave him an extremely dim view of human nature. And I think probably that drove some of his,
I think that's why he's so disturbed. I mean, honestly, I know atheists that have lived a nicer lifestyle than Augustine. I mean, like he was out there. I think before he converted to Christianity, he was living life hard mode, from what I couldn't tell from all, like his view of depravity and sexuality. It makes it very clear to me that he was out there. And so when he comes back, of course he thinks everybody's going to be, oh my gosh, everybody's depraved. Because I've seen all this depravity. So clearly it's, this is how we are. And so it's almost like a guy that comes back from war and sees the worst of humanity and then kind of applies it to everybody. It's like, well, I mean, is it all of humanity, or is this just the worst of humanity that you focus on?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't have quite as negative a view of him as you, but I mean, I think we're both pointing in the same direction here. Yeah. And that negative view of humanity, when you've seen, I mean, I do relate to it. I have seen a lot, and I have seen just how horrible people can be. And I've even been horrible, although I don't agree that picking on atheists on the internet counts, because really, that's just clean fun. But I mean, really, no. I mean, I've seen some shit. I've seen some real horrible shit. I mean, people who aren't here anymore, suicides, murders, rapes, overdoses, beatings. I've seen it all, and I've met just about every kind of person I've known. I've known Nazis. I've known communists. I've known objectivists. I've known white supremacists. I've known other types of ethno-nationalist supremacists. I've known, liberals, conservatives. I've seen the gamut, and I think I've seen nasty in everybody. I mean, that to me is at least part of why Christianity works for me. Because while I actually do agree with you that no, not everybody goes like St. Augustine or some of these other guys. Yeah, I'm just going to I'm going to try everything. If there's a new sex position, I want to try it. If there's a new horror town, I want to give her a ride. If there's a new drug, I want to take it. Whatever it is, right? There are guys like that, but by and large, most human beings don't choose to embrace total depravity. And so, yeah, the idea that humans are naturally totally depraved doesn't quite work for me. Doesn't quite work for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we can agree there. I think swinging it back around to sexuality and ethics and sex and stuff. I've moved to a position of acceptance of the LGBTQ obligatory Q. I don't know why we're saying it, but fine.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's some who want to identify as asexual or non-sexual.
Okay.
Or I don't identify as anything. I'm just whatever I feel like today. And so
I don't know anybody that's
You never
tying asexuals to a fence. And
I've run into some asexuals and some queers. Yeah.
But I will say this.
Hello?
Kathleen, hang on a second. We can hear you. Kathleen, I did invite. Kathleen is transsexual and a Christian. I don't know if you guys have talked. So.
But I would like to talk more with Kathleen because we're having a really good conversation here, but we're almost halfway done. But I don't know how to catch you up. But nice to meet you, Kathleen.
No, same to you.
We were just all right. Wait a minute. So you're transsexual and you consider yourself a Christian, right? Can I ask what kind of Christian?
I don't have any specific denomination.
Okay. Are you in one of those LGBT Christian groups, or are you just free form hanging out?
No, I actually go to a Southern Baptist church.
Do you really?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Your accent sounds vaguely British.
South African.
Okay. And you've got Southern Baptists in South Africa?
No, I'm in America. I'm in the southeastern United States. My adopted family goes to a Southern Baptist church. People that I've grown up with go to this same church, so I just kind of go there mostly for the people, not for the theology. The theology is very backwards, but I like the people there personally. So.
And you they don't give you grief, or?
No, which is, sounds surprising, right? You would expect it to.
I wouldn't necessarily. I've been around. Wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I'm certain there are people who are uncomfortable with it and would like to talk to you about it, but.
I mean, there's a couple. So some of the male people that I would consider, friends did have I guess what they would consider an intervention. But they've pretty much accepted this is what I'm doing. But I think the reason maybe that they didn't press is because they know outside of the pastor, there's no one in that church with the theological knowledge and education that I have.
Oh, really?
So I don't think I don't think that they think there's anyone outside of the pastor who could press me on any biblical issues.
Well, I've got my own doubts on the matter. I'm not here to hector anybody, and what you're describing doesn't actually surprise me as much as people seem to think it should, but it really doesn't. So what is are you of the theological bent of thinking God made you this way sort of thing, or what's your thought process on the whole transgender thing?
I mean, if I'm going to give a biblical explanation for it, let me say this. If you were to classify me, you would classify me probably as some kind of Bodian. which is a school of hermeneutics written in the 20th century by a theologian named Karl Barth. And his hermeneutical approach to the Bible, his approach to exegesis, was to return to the way that the early, what we would consider the earliest church fathers, Irenaeus, Paul, Peter, people like that, the first century church fathers would have interpreted Jesus' actions on this earth in lieu of the Old Testament.
Wait a minute. Can I remember something? Did you say Karl Barth?
Yeah, Karl Barth.
I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same guy. I didn't know he had written on this issue. I know who Karl Barth is. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on, Kathleen.
No, it's okay. Well, he's not written extensively on transsexuality. He is the father of the hermeneutical approach that I use to the Bible. So if I were to give a biblical exposition, I would just simply say something to the effect of God created the world good. He created humans divine. Humans fell. When we fell, we experienced the manifestation of that fall biologically, which would include anything that is not the way in which God intended Adam and Eve to live. The question becomes, is living in a fallen state necessarily sinful? And I see no reason to believe that living in a fallen state is necessarily sinful.
Okay, but what about the argument that you should be trying harder to overcome whatever habitual... Yeah, I'm not hectoring you in the least. I'm merely asking.
No, sure, these are legitimate questions.
Yeah, what I mean, like, you know, saying that it's not okay for a man to dress like a woman, male and female. He created them. Well, I mean, let's go with the dress thing for starters. Just transsexualism, we used to call it. We have to have a word for it. We used to call it cross-dressing. We don't even have a word for that anymore. But I mean,
transvestitism.
Yeah, transvestitism. Thank you. And that sort of thing. Where do you come down on the biblical stuff on that? I'm curious.
So the only reference I know that anybody can really give is that particular verse, which would be Deuteronomy 22:5, which says that a man shall not dress as a woman, and a woman shall not dress with a man as a man. Now, there's several different ways I approach that verse. If it's in a biblical study context, I'm going to talk about what that meant to Jews at the time that the verse was written in Deuteronomy, which would be about the 10th century. If it's to a Christian, I'm going to speak about it in terms of the renewed covenant with Christ. And if I'm defending it against someone who thinks LGBT people are bad, I'm just going to be blunt. Christians aren't under the old covenant, we're under the new covenant, and the law is no longer applicable to us.
Well, also, you always got to look to, like, I always look at Levitical laws, and are they responses to the neighboring laws and the neighboring customs? And the answer is yes. So a lot of homosexuality was incorporated in temple worship, and dare I say, sex magic and cults and things like that. And so, like,
they still go on. They're nothing new. They're nothing new.
And so, like, this idea of separating out from those opposing religions was a big deal to the Jews. And also, this is a struggling nomadic society that's trying to build a nation. And while they're building a nation, they are obsessed with their ancestry. And and so, like, for them, if you look at the time and place, this is a huge deal to them.
Yeah, the Spackle's correct. One of the things that's really remarkable about the Jews, I mean, we owe so much to the Jews that we don't even realize. But one of the things that we truly owe to them is, one, this semblance of ancestry, and two, this semblance of monotheism and justice, right? And the way they went about that was, to really truly every exodus, every exile in Judaic history is marked by this differentiation, and we really see it culminate in and around the 7th century BCE with a final rejection of any kind of polytheistic worship. The exile in Babylon really screwed with the Jews' sense of identity. And so, this is where we get circumcision, this is where we get Deuteronomy, Exodus, things like that. And so this is just really an attempt to differentiate from the polytheistic view of the world, which the Jews in between the 10th and 7th century, in their exile into Babylon, felt was the reason that they were exiled to Babylon, because they did not reject polytheism, that the kingdom of David and Solomon allowed for the continual worship of polytheistic gods, and so Yahweh did what Yahweh does. You reject me, I reject you.
Okay, just in case anybody's confused, when Kathleen says that, Kathleen is talking about BC, so 10th century BC and so on.
Yes.
Just to be clear, in case anybody's getting confused, this wasn't 1,000 years ago. This was 3,000 years ago. Okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Obviously, quite a few Christians disagree with this take, but we didn't come here for that debate. We came here to just have a conversation about this. Just so you know, Kathleen, one of the things, and I started with this, one of my biggest griefs with the entire atheist rationalist community on the internet at this point is their tendency to blame homophobia on the Abrahamic religions and the Abrahamic faiths, and they never openly state it, but they become angry if you suggest that, aversion to, let's say, alternative sexualities generally, and we'll use the LGBTQ plus umbrella. Aversion to that is ubiquitous in every culture.
Yes.
Every culture. There's just no exception. And in fact, when you look at explicitly atheist regimes, frequently they really might just kill you dead, Kathleen, in China.
Yeah.
Well,
Or
actually,
Soviet Russia.
In China right now, it has been illegal. Legal. It has been legal to be homosexual or transgender.
Right. Well, I'm sorry.
Since 1997. So
Right.
Since then.
Well, one of the things that they like to do is that they will still force you to have a sex change. That still happens.
That's happening in Iran.
That's one of the interesting things.
They advocate it in places like China, and sometimes it happens. So they can
and if we look at Japan, Japan, it's legal to be transgender in Japan, but there is also forced sterilization because I agree with you. There is a ubiquitous malice towards. There are exclusions. The Spartan army is a great example of an exclusion where homosexuality was actually indoctrinated into the ranks.
Make love, then war was their indoctrination.
I think they were called the Scarlet Band. Yeah, in reality, human sexuality is a complicated issue. If you want to take a hard-ass Catholic view, it's actually not. If I were taking a hard-ass Catholic view, it's not hard at all. There's male and female, and that is it. And there is for
the purpose of procreation too. You
That's
can't
correct.
You can't be doing blowjobs.
That's right. Sex and procreation are inextricably linked, and I do generally believe that to be true. I believe that is the ideal. I know most people fall short of the ideal. But putting it aside, take away all the religious aspects. I can tell you, like I said, in Japan, it may have changed in recent years, but I've known gays from Japan, and they'll tell you, the Japanese attitude, not Christian at all, but a businessman who got caught having sex with another man, in most circumstances, would be ruined by his reputation. He'd be considered a pervert or whatever. Although if he were powerful and seen as the top in a very specific type of relationship in a very specific place and time, that might be considered acceptable. But the general tolerance of it, no. Or if you're going to be transgendered, this is true in a lot of countries, totally irrespective of religion. If you're going to be transgender, actually, if you're going to be a cross-dresser, you won't be accepted. This is true in a lot of societies. If you're going to be a cross-dresser, you won't be accepted. But what you're doing, Kathleen, would be. There would just be legal and other requirements upon you, but it would be, okay, you're going to live as a woman, that will be accepted.
I think the only difference is they would require a full-blown surgery in certain places.
Some places they would, and some places they won't. There's I will find, if anybody's genuinely interested, there was a really fascinating article about this on an Eastern European country where they have a centuries-old tradition of women having the option at some point, usually early in life. They do this. They can do it later in life, but it's usually fairly in early life. Of women, they even have a name for it and laws about it and customs about it, who can declare, I am a man, and I shall live as a man and be known as a man forevermore. They're required never to have sex with a man because they get pregnant. But otherwise, they will accept all the legal requirements, which can be onerous, by the way, on a man, because there are legal requirements on men that women don't have in those societies. People forget that. They think like becoming a man makes you automatically privileged. No, they have to give up a lot of female privilege and really live that way. And if they start dressing as a woman, they'll be in trouble. I'm sorry, what?
Well, so I think the real thing that what I've noticed that both sides kind of miss, right? And I was actually having a conversation about this earlier in another context. You know, we're in the 21st century Anno Domini, right? So that's forward, not backwards, for your audience. And so every day, you know, we look around us and what do we see? We see technology, we see material, everywhere we go, right? But we've still got a large majority of the population of this planet that in some way, shape, or form believes in ancient culture and tradition. And what I see is almost this attempt by both sides to reclaim, on the one side with the rational community to claim superiority, and on the other side to reclaim superiority. And what that's producing is on the rational side, this, you know, this just really what I consider unadulterated attack on the faith communities. And on the faith community side, this seemingly this notion that we forget that ancient Jews, Muslims, Christians, and especially in like the Near Eastern religions and Hinduism and Manichaeism and so on, that all these religions are progressive religions, that each iteration of a generation creates its own interpolation of how the practices are meant to be done. And if we go just to like Judaism, we see like the difference between what we would call the ages of the Bible. We have the age of creation, we have the age of law, we have the age of judges, we have the age of kings, all the way up into, in the Christian faith, being the age of grace. And each one of these generational progresses changes the way in which people of faith are meant to view the world around us. The problem is that on the Abrahamic side of the faith, especially like Christianity, we stopped in the first century, right? We said this is the age of grace, and for 2,000 years we viewed the entirety of Western progress through the lens of first century teaching. And that's why we have, I think, the attitudes that we have towards a lot of these minority groups of people. You know, and it's not just LGBT community, it's almost any disenfranchised community. If we just look at the way that, say, American Protestants treat immigrants, is totally divorced from the teachings of the book they claim to uphold. You know, Christ specifically teaches us how to treat immigrants. And it is not to put up walls and kick out and arrest. It's to invite into your home, to feed, to nurture, to love,
all right,
and to guide towards salvation.
You're going, we're going a little in. I'm tempted to start arguing with that because I don't think Christians are obligated to that beyond a certain point of reason. And I think that's where the immigration debate really comes down. There is a point of reason where you can't just impose that on people. But that may be worthy of another debate on its own. I mean, I'd love to have that conversation with you, because I think people need to have more serious conversations like that too. Because I agree with you that excess nativist sentiment is a problem. But I also happen to think that highly aggressive nativist sentiment comes when people have legitimate grievances. And so,
Well, the point, if you just indulge me for a minute, the point that I was making there wasn't necessarily to turn the conversation to that. It was to point out that the way in which the faith goes about itself today versus the way that the faith went about itself at the iteration are divorced from each other at this point. So if there's this great meme out there, right? It's got Christ doing the Sermon on the Mount. And he says, I give you 2 commandments. Honor God and love your neighbors. He would love yourself. And of course, the crowd's going, but what if they're gay? What if they're trans? What if they're Muslim? And Jesus is like, did I stutter? That's the point. That's the faith that I believe in. That's what that book teaches me.
I will give you that. I do. I will again note that I don't think that there is a real argument to be had about the immigration issue. There is, and both sides have problems. This is frequently the complaint. But I mean, broadly speaking, I think you're pretty much right there. A lot of Christians really are not being very Christian, and because even towards the Muslims, they're not having the proper Christian attitude. I've literally heard Christians tell me Muslims are animals.
I've
Like,
had that argument with people where people have told me that they're animals and deserve to be slaughtered.
That is totally off the reservation for any Christian, by the way. You're done being a Christian if you talk that way. I mean, I can say it rhetorically in a moment of anger, but I mean, I'm not saying that anybody who ever had that thought is permanently evil, but no, cool. I mean, seriously, if you're a Christian, your goal is to get them to accept Christ. You're not going to do that by treating them like animals.
But Max, do you go by Max or Dean?
Yeah, absolutely. I prefer Max, please.
Max, okay. So Max, one of the things like psychology teaches you is that the emotion of disgust is sort of like one of the many like grounded emotions that you'll generally have.
Yep.
And for some people, once they start feeling disgust for a people group, that people group suddenly becomes objectified. So if you feel a true disgust for, shall we say, atheists, because in your case, I do sense that you have a disgust for atheist activists. It would be very
activists, yes.
It'd be very easy for you to accidentally fall into objectification, or when people feel disgust over Catholicism because they've decided that everybody that's a Catholic, the kitty toucher, and then they get that disgust thing going on. All of a sudden, all Catholics are part of this objectified group.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that disgust, when it's not reeled in, it does, and it doesn't require religion. It's actually just a base emotion that you have to decide whether or not it's rational or irrational. Is it beneficial or not beneficial?
Because of attacks on my person and smearing upon my person, and attacks including physical attacks on people I know, and because of indifference to this when I bring it up, I have gotten a general aversion. If somebody is identifying with LGBT, I immediately just assume they're a hostile person until they prove different because of my experiences. And that hurts to say that because I've been pro-gay rights since the early 80s. And I have had many conservative Christian friends over the years say, you're a fool, you're being used by these people. These people, they have an agenda and they want to hurt us, and you're going to regret this. And I'm having a hard time with some of my Christian friends now, like, gosh, I mean, it's gotten so hostile towards Christians from the LGBT. And I'm like, what about all the LGBT outreach to Christians? What about all the LGBT Christians? What about all the, it is the shame of, Michael Voris screams bloody murder about it, but the Catholic Church is full of gay-friendly bishops in the United States. And I'm just like, and then you people want to lay all the homophobia on us? It gets very upsetting and making me think, why was I so tolerant all these years? Was I a fool to be nice to people like you, Kathleen? It's hard not to have that reaction, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry that people have been all or nothing with
I
you.
know. Well, I know.
And I think that that is harmful. I think this all or nothing thinking of like you have to have absolutely no hangups, otherwise I can't sit with you at my table is
Mhm.
going to it all it is going to do is it doesn't change people's minds. It just polarizes everybody, and everybody's going to believe what they want to believe in their own private clubs.
Well, then you wind up with somebody like Ted Schubat, who I don't disrespect. I really respect his work, with just angrily calling people sodomites and using dodgy scholarship to suggest that gay sex is one of the four greatest of all sins, up there with human sacrifice and stuff. And I'm like, you're out of your mind. You've also got a wrong read of Romans. He does. A lot of people have a wrong read of Romans 1 and 2.
Romans. His how many chapters have I written on Roman? I'm almost done with my first book.
Romans 1 and 2.
And
Somebody, by the way, somebody out there is going to be accusing me of being pro-gay Catholic. No, actually, I'm not. I think all this stuff is actually bad for you. But I don't think the way you deal with it is by hectoring people and abusing people.
This one guy says, "Ugh, do people even know what went on Sodom?" So there's a couple of ways you can read Sodom and Gomorrah. One way to read it is, God sends these angels disguised as men, and I guess they were smoking hot. I don't know, and they go over to Lot, right? And then a mob chases these guys, says, and they knock and they pound on Lot's door and say, "Send him out so that we may get to know him." Which anytime the Bible says the word "know," like, it means like know you, like know all about you.
Yeah.
and and what's funny is the way it was presented to me by a Baptist growing up was that this was a story that proved that sodomites are bad, gay people are bad. And then, like, I go and I read it again, and I'm like, no, rape is bad, and Lot is a terrible moralizing person, because
Yeah.
Lot's solution to it is,
Rape my
here, have
daughters.
my daughters.
I just, I,
Well, and so
Lot's the best guy in
I
the city.
think
The whole city's screwed. Like,
I think that most people, when they talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, they don't actually talk about the origination of Sodom and Gomorrah. They talk about Sodom and Gomorrah as related in Ruth. And they make the same mistake when it's spoken about in Ruth. When they talk about in Ruth, it's spoken about all the immorality of Sodom and Gomorrah, and one of the immoralities is the sexual immorality. But again, they relate the sexual immorality to homosexuality. And look, let's be honest. Let's just be brutally honest here. Did the ancient world have a good view of homosexuality? No, they really didn't. But when people attempt to use Judaic scripture in order to condemn homosexuality today, they will accuse, say, someone like me. Right? I've taken the time, I've read the scripts, I've read it in the Hebrew, I've gone back, I've read the contemporaries, right? There's the amount of hoops that you have to jump through to take Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Ruth. I mean, the amount of hoops that you have to go through to apply that to the modern LGBT community. And then accuse me of jumping through hoops to get to a different exegesis. It's a contradiction in terms. And so, and especially when I hear it from Christians, right? Christians will come at me and they will say, what about Leviticus? What about Deuteronomy? What about all this stuff? And I'm like, what answer are you expecting of me? We're not Jews. We're Christians. We follow Christ, not the Torah.
I think and here's the thing, and here's the frustrating thing that I really want to get at, because in reality, if you look at the history of Christian thinking over 2,000 years, if you look at the tale of Sodom and Gomorrah properly, I believe, because I've read it a few times, it seems very abundant to me that was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah was the choice of the people there to embrace every possible depravity, very much in the mold of what you see somebody like Marquis de Sade, or other psychos who've appeared throughout history, literally a choice to embrace every conceivable depravity in the most depraved way. And there are people like that. They have appeared through history. I believe I've even met people like this. I think that's what the real sin of Sodom is. I'm probably not going to agree with people in that I really do not think homosex is good for you. I don't think it's the right choice at all. But it is not on me to impose that on people. It's there to give me to give that opinion. And beyond that, it is one of all kinds of sins people get into. They like to. What was that part of the book of Romans where Paul said that they say it's worthy of death? Men who have unnatural relations with men are worthy of.
That would be.
Yeah, here it is. Okay.
That would be
Romans chapter 1.
Yeah.
In fact, okay, I'll pull it out of a Catholic Bible here because I want to talk about this. This really is he says they are well aware of God in this Romans. Paul says of these people who have these unnatural relationships, they are well aware of God's ordinance, that those who behave like this deserve to die. Yet they not only do it, but even applaud others who do the same. So in some translations, it says that it's worthy of death. Same thing.
You're in Romans chapter 1?
Romans 1, chapter 1. And one of the things that I want to say about this, and I'm in Romans chapter 1, verse 32 is the one I hear most often. They deserve to die. Some Catholics fall for this. I've even heard Eagle Michael Jones, who I have a lot of respect for, actually, and think he's not right about everything, but a lot. But I think he's somewhat off on this, somewhat. It's hard because I straddle. I don't follow the full gay embracing mold, but I don't follow the full bore hostility mode either. I think I have the right middle mode. So we do have Paul saying this. But I'm going to find people, and I will find if this was in 2 Peter, but in 2 Peter, Paul, I'm sorry, St. Peter, who wrote 2 Peter, at the end of it's in 2 Peter 3, he warns that people frequently, that it's easy to misunderstand Paul. I'll find this verse if somebody needs it, but Peter warns that it's easy to misunderstand Paul, and people frequently don't read him carefully, and it's to their peril. I'll find a specific reference if I want. And here's Paul. And at the end of chapter 1 of Romans, he says gays deserve to die, allegedly. And then but then here's the thing. He goes right on in chapter 2. And I'm going to read the whole thing to people to see if they can understand what this content is. Because let me mention something about the chapters. I remember getting into an argument with a Methodist about this once too, but he wasn't listening. The chapter numbers were put there less than 1,000 years ago in English translations for convenience. They're not part of the original text. So when you're looking at these chapter breaks, it was a Catholic bishop, actually, I forget his name. You're just kind of taking his word for it. This is the natural break. But it wasn't there. The breaks aren't there in this original thing. It was a letter Paul wrote. I'll start up in the early parts of this. Let's say around I'll start at verse 24, and I'm going to keep reading, and I'm going to keep reading into chapter 2 without stopping, and see if people don't get a different read out of what Paul is saying. He says, that is why God abandoned them in their inmost cravings. That is why God abandoned them in their inmost cravings to filthy practices of dishonoring their own bodies, because they exchanged God's truth for a lie and have worshipped and served the creature instead of the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. That is why God abandoned them to degrading passions, why their women have exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural practices, and the men in similar fashion too. Giving up their normal relations with women, are consumed with passion for each other, men doing shameful things and receiving in themselves due reward for their perversion. In other words, since they would not consent to acknowledge God, God abandoned them to their unacceptable thoughts and indecent behavior. And so now they are steeped in all sorts of injustice, rottenness, greed, and malice, full of envy, fear, murder, wrangling, treachery, and spite, libelers, slanderers, enemies of God, rude, arrogant, and boastful, enterprising and evil, rebellious to parents, without brains, honor, love, or pity. They are well aware of God's ordinance, that those who behave like this deserve to die. Yet not only do they do it, but even applaud others who do the same. Notice more than homosex was mentioned there, but let me keep reading past the break. So no matter who you are, if you pass judgment, you have no excuse. It is yourself that you condemn when you judge others, since you behave in the same way as those you are condemning. We are well aware that people who behave like that are justly condemned by God. But you, when you judge those who behave like this while you're doing the same yourself, do you think you will escape God's condemnation? Or are you just not disregarding his abundant goodness, tolerance, and patience, failing to realize that this generosity of God is meant to bring you to repentance? Your stubborn refusal to repent is only storing up retribution for yourself on that day of retribution when God's just verdicts will be made known. Paul just agreed that all these people are worthy of death, and just reminded everybody present that everybody's worthy of death. He furthermore doesn't just go after the homosexuals. He's going after people who completely abandoned God and became libelers, slanderers, rude, arrogant, boastful, enterprising and evil, rebellious, without brains, other love or pity, and screwing anything that moved. Okay, that's really what the sin of Sodom is. It's not about people struggling with same-sex attraction. That would be my read on the whole thing.
Well, and he kind of ramps it up to idol worship. And
yeah, that's the critique that that's what I was getting ready to say. So if you go to verse 18, right? We start at the first break here, and I don't read the Catholic Bible. I don't think it's a very good translation, but that's a conversation for another day. We see that the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of the people who suppress the truth by their wickedness and unrighteousness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities and eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that none are with excuse. Now, I find this verse, that lead-in, extremely important, because I try to remind people, when we read, unlike the Old Testament, when we read the New Testament, we have to understand that the majority of the New Testament, as you said, were letters. And so Paul is writing a letter from a prison cell in Rome. And he's writing a letter about what he had seen in Rome. And anybody who has read The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, or The Proclivities of the Roman Empire, or any of these other books out there about the Roman Empire, knows that Rome was horrible. Rome was modern-day Johannesburg. If anybody that knows anything about Johannesburg, they'll get a kick out of that. And so he's seeing not... This is why I cannot equate this verse in any way, shape, or form to the modern LGBT community. Paul is speaking about
pedestry.
Pedastry, yes.
Pedestry.
That's what Paul is speaking about. He's speaking about pedastry. He's speaking about an entire ideology of pedastry, which is exactly what the Catholic Church is going through right now. The Catholic Church isn't suffering from a pedophilia problem. It's suffering from a pedastic problem. It's suffering from a cultural problem.
The Catholic Church right now is suffering. Over 80% of the victims of Catholic sex abuse are teenaged boys. That is really what has happened.
But the point is that it's not about the individual act. It's about the culture. So what does Paul witness in Rome?
By the way, I just want to caveat, because I know that, there's a lot of people Catholic. I am not a Catholic basher. I understand sex abuse happens as often in Protestant churches.
Me either.
It does.
So just
I
so
don't.
you know.
I have nothing but the utmost respect for the Vatican and the papacy and the Catholic faith. I was raised in the Catholic faith. I went to a Jesuit school. My mother was Roman Catholic. I've got nothing but respect for them. And but again, right, we're talking about a cultural thing here, right? Roman culture was pedastic. It
It was.
was pagan.
Oh yeah.
And so Paul is condemning what he sees. Paul, and I know this is an argument that a lot of Protestants like to shoot down, and I'm sure some Catholics like to shoot it down. The Orthodox seem to be more open to it, right? That our understanding of sexual identity, our understanding of what is natural, right? Paul talks about what's natural here, right? When Paul talks about men giving up in their lust, giving up their natural order, and women giving up the natural order, we're not talking about gay people having sex with gay people. We're talking about what we would understand as otherwise heterosexual people engaging in drunken orgies with people of the same sex who are primarily slaves who have no capacity to resist. So what I get out of Romans is a consent issue, right? A drunk issue and a pedastic issue. I do not get a gay issue.
He also makes it clear denial of God is tantamount.
Yes,
Is
this
crucial. I mean, he starts by saying because of that. Because
yes, it's all a result of idolatry. It's all a result of idolatry, which, by the way, is exactly what I mean. Paul was a Pharisee. Paul would have had an immense understanding of the Pentateuch. Paul understands what Israel went through. Every time Israel turned to idols, to Baal, to Elisha, to Elohim, right? Every time they turned to these Asharas, Israel falls and God turns his back on the people. Every time. Idol worship is tied in with every destruction of Israel. It's the primary progenitor of the destruction. When people break the first commandment, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me, you shall make no graven images. That's the first commandment. And everything that happens throughout Judaic history and Christian history, quite, same is.
Without necessarily agreeing or with the idea that there are gay people, because I have my doubts, but let's just, we are generally agreed. No, Paul was talking about a lot more than homosex. He just was. He was talking about a whole lot more there, especially if you just keep on reading into chapter 2. I want to give this quotation that I think a lot more Christians who just quote Paul the way they do really need to go to 2 Peter chapter 3. It's one of the most important things anybody reading Paul should read. Like, if you're going to be quoting Paul, you should be required to go read these 3 verses in 2 Peter 3. Read them before you quote Paul on anything ever again. Let me read. This is Peter warning you about Paul, about reading Paul. Plain out. He says, think of our Lord's patience as your opportunity to be saved. Our brother Paul, who is so dear to us, told you this when he wrote to you with the wisdom that he was given. He makes this point too in his letters as a whole whenever he touches on these things. In all his letters, there are, of course, some passages which are hard to understand. And these are the ones that uneducated and unbalanced people distort in the same way as they distort the rest of Scripture to their own destruction. Since you have been forewarned about this, my dear friends, be careful that you do not come to the point of losing the firm ground that you're standing on, carried away by the errors of unprincipled people. Folks, St. Peter is warning you about being careless when reading Paul. And I think this conversation, whatever part of it you might nitpick, is proving this point. You can't just pick Paul up and read him plainly on almost any topic.
Well, what about the part where he says, it's better to remain unmarried than married, and it's like when you first read it, you go, Paul, you're so tooting your own horn. I don't have sex. I'm a Obi-Wan Kenobi here. I don't have to, or is it that he is talking to a persecuted church where he knows death might be imminent any moment? And he's talking to that persecuted church saying, don't waste your time, don't get distracted, don't get tied down if you can't help it. But if you need to get married, get married.
They were facing massive persecution. He was talking about to the early church. I mean, I do think Paul's example does also establish that it is perfectly acceptable for a Christian to remain unmarried, and the celibate life is perfectly acceptable within Christian thinking. But yeah, no, I agreed. Even when you see Paul talking like that, in fact, if you read it in some translations, it's all very confusing. He says, it is better to be unmarried than married, but it is just as good to be married. He almost equivocates the way he says it, because he doesn't want to say being married is bad. But I'm giving it to you that, yeah, a lot of the context is like that. They were suffering heavy martyrdom and persecution in that early church.
Well, I want to, I can definitely tell my own story, but I also wanted to say that I had a conversation with a young man in a Discord, and this young man was really beating himself up and suffering, and he felt like he was being persecuted. Forget this. This is an evangelical church. Usually evangelicals don't have sex before marriage, for not having sex before marriage, for not being interested in getting married, for not being interested in sex, for not being somebody that masturbates, not somebody that has wet dreams. He doesn't have he just isn't interested. Now he happens
probably
to be,
because they think he's a gay guy.
well, he happens to be autistic too, right? So he's
there are Christians.
He's just not on the spectrum of, and I told him, I said, that's wrong, because Paul says it is okay. Jesus, I believe, was celibate. I don't believe in this nonsense, Mary Magdalene. I don't believe this Jesus Christ superstar thing. I believe Jesus was celibate. And you know what? I've known celibate people. There's nothing wrong with you if you don't want to have sex. If you're not interested in sex and it's not your thing, there's nothing wrong with that.
There really is ancient. There are some Christians who will really, especially they do this to young men, pressure them to get married, like that's a Christian obligation. I'm sorry, but it's not. Now, I mean, within Catholic teaching, I think we do get it correct. If you're not, if you should either be married or you should choose a profession where you will be celibate. And there's multiple like that. Now, people think that's too harsh. Well, some will also say that's an ideal. We know some people will fall. The point is, no, there is nothing shameful in the Christian tradition. Nothing in the Bible. St. Paul says it is better to be unmarried, like himself. And now you can say that was contextualized to the time, but it's clearly no prohibition to being celibate if that's what you want to be. By the way, we should wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so, but I hope we can have you both back on, especially both of you. You too, Kathleen.
Yeah, I'd like to just. I don't know if you know much of the Eastern Orthodox Church.
I'm very fond of the Eastern Orthodox. The Red Pill Religion team has multiple Eastern Orthodox friends. They are our brothers in Christ.
So, one of my favorite modern biblical scholars comes from the Eastern Orthodox Church. His name is Archbishop Metropolitan Callistos Ware. And in one of the homilies he gave, he specifically addressed the LGBT, issue, if you want to call it such a thing, inside the Eastern Orthodox Church. And the way he went about it, I think, is striking. He pointed out, one, that the church today seems obsessed with sex. And he points out that it's never a dignified position to be on your knees looking through the keyhole of someone else's bedroom. He also points out that sin breeds itself in darkness and is extinguished in the light. He says, what I find most horrific about the treatment of the homosexual in the church is that we treat the monogamous penitent who looks towards a marriage with a person and a life in Christ worse than we treat the single penitent who may be seeking non-spiritual relations on a regular basis in some kind of debauched club. Basically, he says, if a single person comes to confession and says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I've committed this sin," the priest will say, okay. But if a monogamous homosexual out couple comes,
Lifestyle, you're going to hell. It's a lifestyle, right?
so
Like, how many times have you heard that?
yeah, so it's if the monogamous and open couple come out, the penitent may say, can you give this up? And the penitent may say, I'm not ready to give that up. And can you say, and they say, okay, well, can you forego sex? And he says, well, I'm not ready to do that. It may be that the pastor refuses to give communion. And so I think that's telling of the way the church, regardless of the conversation that needs to be had, no one is saying that the church should give up its traditions. No one is saying that the church should merely adopt some new age understanding, some new age exegesis of the Bible simply because it's convenient. But as the Archbishop points out, that we need to treat this as something that is deserving of respect. And we need to point out that we are treating people who want to pursue monogamous, spiritual, filled relationships in union with Christ in a very bad way. And yet we have no problem merely saying, okay, go say your Hail Marys, to the single person who's just pursuing, one night stands. And that's very, very telling, because if you treat the monogamous couple in the way that the church tends to do, what happens? They either, one, stop going to church, two, leave the faith, or seek their passions in the dark. And the darkness is where the sin permeates.
Well, right.
We do need to close up here. So, all right, go ahead and give your final thoughts, Spackle.
I just want to take some time and maybe kind of paint a story, because I feel like I didn't get a really chance to really do this. I know that you talked about that you feel persecuted by the LGBTQ. I'm so bad at acronyms community, and
I literally have been, and as have friends of mine. So,
and
yeah.
I'm sorry. And when I see things like that are people like at Gay Pride and they're dressed up as a nun or Jesus and with gay Romans, and I'm just like, really, like, come on, man, But here's the thing too, like, it's been my experience, and again, I've had a foot in both Catholic and Protestant growing up, but it's been my experience in evangelical churches that if you are on the spectrum, you are told that you are especially evil and you are especially bad. And that's been my experience.
Wait a minute, on the spectrum, which spectrum?
Like the spectrum of same-sex attraction.
Oh,
So
I see. Okay.
And it's been my personal experience that that's the case. And so much so that I've been told that I'm going to hell for either being too accepting or somebody that says, hey, I have same-sex attraction. I'm married to a man. I've been married for 18 years, but I also have some same-sex attraction. Well, you're going to hell. Oh, okay. I followed the rules. Still, clearly you're not, because that should have been going away by now. You don't understand. Like
you would be burnt out of all normal passions. Yeah, that deserves a conversation too.
People torture people. Not even, like, it's one thing. Like, a lot of the average Catholics are pretty loving, and they'll still say it's disordered. I'll take that. But if you're saying that you're especially evil, like,
no, that's
you're
where
just
I think,
destroying people.
Yeah, I think that's where Ted Schubat and his friend Andrew go completely off the rails, cherry picking the Bible and cherry picking the church fathers and not really looking at the catechism, actually. I don't know that I agree with everything everybody here just said. In fact, there's some things I would have just taken issue with. But let it be said that, again, this is about learning how to have adult conversations about these things, because the fact is that it is not, being same-sex attracted is not a sin. It simply isn't. And this is something that, and within Catholic teaching, absolutely, we generally believe that everybody is born with certain crosses to bear, and that will be weaknesses to sin that they have. At minimum, that should be something everybody accepts about themselves, that you are born with a tendency towards sins, and you probably have certain sins you're more prone to than others, whether it's lying or vanity or stealing, even if it's petty taking things, welching on debts, sexual masturbating to porn, whatever it is, everybody's got their weaknesses. And so, yes, the first struggle for the Christian is to realize you're not better. St. Paul makes it clear in Romans 1 and 2 that you are not better than the sodomite. St. Paul in Romans 2 makes it very clear that you are no better than the sodomite. And so that's an important Christian message to remember. And so regardless of what any of these are, and I will speak from a personal perspective, is that I do believe, as E. Michael Jones and others do, that a lot of current gender confusion and sex confusion is indoctrinated by the culture. I think that is happening, and we'll probably do a show on that soon too.
I could definitely talk about that.
But yeah, let's do it. But let me just say,
I've had some wonderful conversations with E. Michael Jones.
Have you?
That was not a true statement. I've had conversations with E. Michael Jones. I wouldn't credit them as wonderful.
The bottom line is, though, you have to look at the reality, even if you accept that it's 100% indoctrination and ideology and psychology and 0% anything else, that it's just plain sin and 0% anything else. We have a whole generation of people, somebody comes to you and he's 21 years old and says he's never been attracted to women, and that he's same-sex attracted and he's had sex a few times. The response is not to say, "You filthy sodomite, that's as bad as murder." That is not the correct response. It's just not. Okay, and I think everybody should be able to agree that that is certainly true. So yeah, guys, let's hope we can come back for more conversations. I would really like to plumb Kathleen's biblical perspective. I do have a fairly orthodox Catholic perspective, but even still,
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to come back on your cast.
All right, awesome.
You can get my information from Spackle. I don't know if you're on Discord. That's generally where I hang out.
Oh yeah, I'm on there. We'll contact each other through there. This has been a great conversation. I've really appreciated it. Everybody make sure to go and subscribe to the Holy Spackle. And Kathleen, if you ever get a channel you actually use, let us know. We'll hook up later and we'll talk. These are conversations that desperately need to happen. And they need to happen with the atheist, skeptic, rationalists too, because they need to get more adult about these things. So anyway, everybody, I'm sorry, Spackle, one last thought, because I'm about to close.
One last thought. You might want to look this person up. Rachel Held Evans just passed away, and I don't know if anybody's familiar. She's an Episcopalian, and I've always appreciated her because she's always wrestled with her doubts in public, and that's bothered a lot of evangelicals. And recently, Calvinists, particularly J.D. Hall from Pulpit and Pen and Bible Thumping Wingnut, have been attacking her upon her death. She died suddenly of an infection that caused her brain to swell. She died at 37 years old, has 2 little babies and a husband. And people are going, well, she's burning in hell because she's too accepting of gays. She's too loving.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem with, even though I think he's right about some things, that's kind of the problem with Michael Voris too. But all right, let's go ahead and close this up now. Tomorrow night, we will be having John C. Wright on. We have moved our Monday nights with John C. Wright back to Wednesday nights. So John C. Wright, science fiction writer, lawyer, philosopher, and fellow Catholic. We'll be back probably to talk more about our Mother Mary. my personal favorite topic. And we are here every night. Andrew and Josh Brister have debates lined up coming up soon with some atheists. I don't do professional atheist debates anymore. I get too crazy. So, but anyway, if you like the work we're doing, check us out on redpillreligion.com. Drop a dime in the patronage, would you? And give us a like, subscribe, and God bless.